Welcome to the space for transformational leaders to unleash their magic, see better client results, work lighter, and live source. Hello and welcome to today's conversation in the Certified Sourced Leader series here on our YouTube channel. I'm here with the fabulous Paula Forbes. Hi, Paula.
Hi.
I'm so excited to do this together. We've done a webinar together, but we've never done this. So I'm really excited. And so let me just tell people a little bit about who you are, and then we'll dive in.
Okay.
So Paula describes herself as a conversation catalyst who guides leaders committed to making meaningful change. Her leadership workshops, institutes, and retreats provide a transformative experience for leaders, allowing them to lead their organization successfully and in alignment with their mission and vision. As a coach and facilitator, Paula's job is to hold space for diverse points of view and create a setting where participants can have powerful discussions without polarizing their relationships. She uses a variety of methods in her workshops to design safe spaces where participants can feel comfortable to have tough conversations and ultimately learn how to move forward in a collaborative way. So this is like just skimming the surface of who you are. So Paula's an attorney, and I could list all of her accomplishments as an equity attorney, primarily working in the education space over the last 20 some years. So what that means in my translation is she will go into schools and help to facilitate change when an incident has happened around race or any type of prejudice, I would say, but particularly race. And so after doing that work for quite some time, Paula has learned a lot, which we're going to talk about today. And she's really shifted her work into a leadership work for these leaders who are, running diverse organizations and multicultural schools and communities. So, Paula, I like to start with a couple of questions, and then we'll dive into your work and your why. Sure. This idea of leading sourced, this is what I'm super curious about. Obviously, the conversation I like to have. What does it mean for you to lead sourced in your work? Like, you're an attorney, and so that's kind of a unique combination. What has that meant for you?
Well, it's completely different. I mean, it revolves around my own reckoning and my own transformation on being a leader and helping people to really see who they are and go through their own self-discovery around their sourced energy and who their inner knowing is, and to be comfortable and confident and committed to their inner knowing. And I work with leaders all the time where they tell me what they want, but they don't understand their purpose, and they truly don't understand what that means. And so when you ask about leading sourced, I love to get people to that place of where they are, where we talk about it with our sourced energy, where they are with their discomfort, and that understanding, the exploration of what that discomfort is, to this desired place, and in the process to build a commitment to be able to have no more fear about going to that place of commitment and desire.
There's so many things you said in there I want to unpack. When you imagine a world where, I like to say, I'm imagining the world where people have the sourced t-shirt or the bumper sticker, and that's a clue to say, hey, I've done my inner work. I know who I am. You can trust my knowing for myself. Doesn't mean I'm projecting it on you, but I know, what's right for me. What changes in our world, in your perception, when more people are sourced?
They're willing to lean into the resistance of the work that they're facing and doing. They find their voice. They are fearless in their work. And I don't mean fearless in the sense that I'm creating warriors, in the work that I do with civil rights and working in the system of equity. People always make the assumption that if you're going to work in this work, you're going to be a protester or an organizer, or you're going to beat against a system and beat it down and break it down and do it in a way that we kind of visualize a sense of conflict. I'm saying that there's this inner knowing of who you are as a human, and it's almost more peaceful. It's this place that you get that's not the conflict, but to be at peace with understanding our why and our purpose, and being willing to step into that in a way that creates space for other people to be able to step into it as well. So it's almost the opposite of the assumptions that we make about people that want to deconstruct systems, deconstruct racism, think about, how we can work together better. We always think that we have to go through this huge conflict, and almost in a violent way, because that's the way we've always looked at it in our history. But our history teaches us so much more than the conflict. Our history really teaches us a pathway to peace.
Ooh, there's a lot in there, Paula. Thank you for that. And you used words like, I'm going to come back to the pathway to peace, but I want to unpack a little bit. You used the word in the beginning, your own reckoning.
Yeah.
And then you said, this actually helps us to face our resistance.
Yeah.
And so, I'd love for you to speak to that a little bit and bring in a little bit of your backstory of being raised in the Midwest by a civil rights activist and kind of coming up in this world. What has that reckoning or facing the resistance meant for you?
I've really kind of had my own racial reckoning at different stages in my life. And that's why I love to be able to bring people through this process. We'll probably talk about a little bit later, but I was raised, my father, we came to the States when I was a baby. He was a civil rights leader, and we landed in Madison, Wisconsin for a number of reasons that we don't really even need to get into now. But my father was a civil rights leader. He was also one of the founding members of the Urban League in Madison, which was a pretty significant thing in the 1960s for him to do in early Madison, Wisconsin. No one would rent or sell us a home when we moved there. So in an integrated area, the mayor of Madison actually rented us our first home that was on the north side. It was the industrial side of town. And so as a result of us working towards finding housing in and integrating neighborhoods, my father was the first. And we then integrated the neighborhood on the west side of town. That meant that I was then a little Black girl. I was the youngest of 5 that was going to integrate my elementary school. And I did that. It was Randall Elementary in Madison, Wisconsin. And my sister and my family, we were one of the first Black families to live on the west side of town. And so my experience then gave me an understanding of race and what race meant, being the first, and the impact of being the first, and the impact of living in a neighborhood that didn't look like me. But that was very different. That was when I was a young girl in the way in which I looked at the world. And when I say that I've gone through many racial reckonings, I really have. And being 61, I've been able to look back on that and say, that's what I knew then. I knew that there was resistance in that neighborhood for me to be there. But I also knew that I had incredible allies that made it possible for me to stay there. I didn't get run out of that neighborhood because I had allies that created the container for which I could live and grow. And I did have, some traumatic experiences growing up, some that have stayed with me my entire life. And I now am working on that process of healing and what that meant and how that has carried with me throughout my whole life. So I started as a young girl, and then the stages of racial reckoning in my younger years, and then in my young adult years going to college, understanding and learning my history, because I had intentionality when I was older to who I was, what my history is, what Black history is. And then in law school to understand it from a constitutional level, to be able to really study race in America and what that meant from its origins. but it really didn't impact me until just recently, which is what I think is, almost amazing to be, in my late 50s and have this racial reckoning at the time of the pandemic and the precipice of race in America in my life with the murder of George Floyd. It all
Which
kind of
I want to
came
underline was right in your community.
Yeah, right here in my community. I live in a suburb. This happened right in the city, but not far away from me, not far enough away from me where it didn't feel the tremble, that I didn't see what was going on in my community. One of the charter schools that I helped to create was right smack dab in the middle of the chaos. And the school districts in which I work for were right there. And so the children that were attending these school districts were in the midst of this chaos when George Floyd was murdered. And I just have to say, George Floyd was not the first to be murdered in the United States because of race and who he was as a Black man and the police brutality and the racism in America. He wasn't the first, and we know that. But what he represented, because of the way that we could, for the first time, really telecast in real time through social media, and to watch and witness this globally, he represented that whole piece about what are we really seeing and what does that mean and what the impact is. And I think that is why all of us have, forever cemented those visuals in our hearts and in our minds because we were able to see it.
Paula, you spoke about being a little girl, integrating your elementary school and having allies, and then also feeling the resistance.
Mm-hmm.
And, you said earlier, lean into the resistance, like that this work can help us actually lean into the resistance. Mm-hmm. So you're the founder of the Finding Human Institute. You take groups of humans through this experience to look at their own racial reckoning or their own story when it comes to race. And that is people of color and white people going through this experience, all allies, going through the experience together to actually say, what is my own story? And I'm going to use your word, what is my own resistance when it comes to this conversation around race? And I've been through it. You do this so powerfully, and you teach our certified source leaders and give them this work as well. What do you want people to know who have felt that ripple of the George Floyd murder, of, just the state of the world today? I've seen more people being activated than ever. What do you want them to know about this idea of resistance when it comes to this conversation around race?
Well, it's a personal one, and it's also a systemic one. So we'll start with the personal one. The personal one is really, and a lot of times, an unknowing about how we show up and how we impact based on our own history. The resistance is, a lot of times we don't necessarily want to unpack that because we don't want to really reveal, some of the bad stuff, some of the stuff that's really hard to understand, or we don't really know how to really deconstruct it and figure it out. And what does that mean? And am I part of this? And how am I a part of this? That's that whole analysis that you kind of go through. Finding Human is about the self-discovery of the way in which we see the world in relationship to race and our history about race. And so when I say the resistance, it's almost a resistance to try and really unpack the way in which we see the world based on our race story, what we were told, what people taught us, how we really think about race, and what we don't know about how we are in the world is in relationship to race. And so I take people through that process of unpacking that story. And that's that internal resistance to, man, if I open up this Pandora's box, what will it reveal to me? And now I have to wrestle with what this means and how I impact the world. It started really, Darla, because I teach education and the law. And most of the teachers in our system are white. And we have a predominant population of children of color in our public educational systems. And we wonder why those students of color are not succeeding at the same rate as kids that are not of color, as white children. And I don't mean to compare Black children or children of color to white children. I just mean to compare them to what does success look like in education and why aren't they getting there? And it's hard because everybody wants to blame the child. And I'm not blaming teachers, but I want teachers to understand that they have something in the way they show up and how they show up that creates a barrier to their ability to teach to children of color and to make them create or make them feel this container of safety that they can show up authentically. And so that started me on my journey really of being able to peel those onions back and saying, when you're in a classroom, you are impacting that classroom in this way. And some of that is because of your history about who you are and what you were told around the issues of race. And we need to unpack that.
Yeah. I know when I was in corporate and I was trained as a coach to facilitate these conversations about diversity, and we had to look at our story.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't have a race story. You know, I grew up in a small town in the middle of nowhere. I don't have a race story. And one, I did. There were people of color in my community. I just wasn't seeing it, right? It was near a Native American reservation. Two, we can't grow up in this world and not have a race story. I mean, literally, we can't. And to think that we don't is really the issue, right?
That's the resistance. The resistance is to say, you know, slavery's over. I'm not racist. That's something that happened in my history. My parents did that. So I don't need to look at that. And to fail to look at that then is a failure of us to be able to look at the systemic issues in our systems, in our cultures, in our policies and practices, in our laws. And that is why we have such a disproportionate equity and equality system in our society, because we fail to look at our history and to say, well, that's back in the past. We don't need to worry about that. That past, just like when you look at ancient ruins or you go and you look at these wonderful architectures and you think, wow, I can't believe it. That's your history. You can't deny your history. You have to really examine it. And how does that allow you to really lean in to say, okay, now I know how I can make room for others to show up. But you have to examine it first.
That's so good, because you said, you know, you were using the example of the teachers and creating a container of safety so that the students can show up authentically.
Right.
And if I'm kind of stringing these pieces together, if I am a teacher and I have resistance to an authentic expression that's not the same as mine, then I'm not going to create safety around that unless I've done my work on that resistance. And, you know, we're doing that as retreat leaders. We both lead retreats, and that's what we're creating. And so we know the power of that space where you can show up authentically. And what I'm hearing is you're spreading that by having people have this conversation to create more safety.
Right. You're absolutely right. It started in education. And I really didn't know what I was doing until I really went through, you know, the source experience myself and became a source leader and really was able to identify my own discomfort and how I could get to this desire of being able to create space for everybody to have this transformational experience when it comes to their own resistance around the issues of race. And just because I talk about race, this is one thing that I want people to truly understand. It starts with race because our country was built on a system of race and a racial construct that people were different. But let me just bring it home. The other day, I had a medical condition that required a transfusion. And no one asked me what race I would prefer when it came to the transfusion. It was the same. It was blood. I needed blood. And it wasn't based on a racial differentiation at all. They didn't distinguish it. The bag that hung from the thing didn't say black blood, white blood, Asian blood, right?
That's so good.
It ran through my veins and it made me well. And so I sat there and I thought to myself, we aren't different when it comes to how we breathe and how we live in this world. It is only when we externally judge each other based on what we see. And that is based on historical issues that we have to reconcile. And when we do that, we open space for everyone. And it starts maybe with race, but it doesn't end there. And that's what's really been the reckoning for me, is to create space, not just to start and have people understand why we talk about race and why we need to have this conversation. But there's so much more resistance out there on how we judge people every day for who they are as humans. And the Finding Human Institute is about finding human, not just discovering issues around race.
Yeah. I love that analogy. And, you know, there is no medical distinction of race. No. So good.
No, it's only what we see on the outside. And we make these assumptions, right? Yeah.
So, you know, you're working with educators and creating this safe space for them to look at their own resistance around this conversation. And what I really love about you, Paula, is like you're studying what's happening and you're getting to the root. And you're really courageous to go to the root, you know? So being a lawyer and coming in and helping them create a system that would prevent a racial incident, and then watching them not follow it. And then helping them create a system and then watching them not follow it. And then you're like, okay, what is going on here? We need to get to the root. And so you keep digging and getting to the root and getting to the root, which is this finding human work. What would you want to share with people about kind of where to start, or that we don't know where to start around understanding race and this conversation about race? What do you want people to know?
That it's okay to start where you are, to just start, to be able to, what I love to do about having conversations is to start first with people that you trust and who love you, around a dinner table, around with friendship, and pull a couple people together and say, I really want to have a conversation around what I know and what I don't know about myself and my history and the way in which I see the world. And then to expand that and create those spaces. But if you build the right container to have that conversation, you need to have that conversation. And it starts first with your own individual self-discovery and your own kind of like experience of, what did I know about race? What was I told? What's different now? What am I learning around that? And that's okay. And not to fear the fact that, oh, if I don't talk about it, then I won't get canceled. Then people won't judge me. And then, you know, you have to step into it. You have to walk into it, gingerly at first if you need to, but find people you trust to have those conversations with. And if not, that's why I like to build those containers for people to have those conversations.
Well, that's what I was thinking, is I would way rather trust your container than bringing a conversation to my family's dinner table before I've had my own, you know, reckoning, if that makes sense, because it's like blind leading the blind. Or being in this conversation over time has helped me strengthen my muscle to where nobody in my immediate circle would have any doubt where I would stand about something.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess I need to admit, some people would dare never to go to their dinner table and have that conversation. They know exactly the resistance that they would meet, right? And so that's why I love creating that container for people to be able to walk into a space that I hold or host, or the people that I train hold or host, and to be able to, speak their truth, and know that that's okay. And know that we will hold that space for them to speak their truth. And I'm not saying that they get to walk in and start insulting people, because we form those agreements of respect, and we form those agreements with how we're going to impact and show up in that space. But what I want people to know is that they can self-examine, and then that they can listen. And when they listen to each other, they start to heal. They can start to heal.
Yeah. And I know that is the core of your belief in your work, is listening creates healing.
Yeah,
and really we have to become better at that as humans, really.
I learn a lot more sometimes from listening to others than, coming up with it myself, or thinking I know everything, or only really being guided by my own beliefs. Obviously, you learn so much more to listening to each other's experiences and what they're going through, and it really does help you heal.
I feel drawn to share something, and then I'm going to ask another question that you and I had discussed. In doing this work, going through Finding Human, I've been in another container around race for white people specifically, and repeated exposure to the conversation, right? I thought I knew some things because I had been trained before. And then I kind of thought, well, haven't we solved this by now? Like, do you know what I mean? I mean, honestly, I did. I was like, gosh, how are we in the same place? But anyway, immersing myself in the conversation, my closest Black friend, who we've been friends for, 15 years, is having entirely different conversations with me about her life than she would have had before the last few years. Like the depth of our relationship and the transparency and authenticity in conversations about race and how race is impacting her is entirely different. And I know you and I have talked about this, like this feeling out of who's safe.
Yes.
To actually share what the truth is. And so, I think as a white person and as a leader of a community, you can think you're safe, or you can think like, I don't judge, I'm not in judgment. And that's one level of healing. But then there's like the familiarity and exposure to the conversation to where you're not tensing up physically at the thought you might say something wrong, or you're right, because that energetic resistance is just as present as if you said something, ridiculous. So I would love to speak to that a little bit. And you had the question of like, how do I become an ally if I don't know much about Black culture?
Right.
So can we kind of have this conversation?
Sure. We always think that we have to know something, or we have to, kind of go out and learn and read all the books and know everything in order to have the conversation, that you have to be fluent at it first, and then you can go out and speak to it. And that's not true. You got to build a muscle. This isn't about, being an ally isn't about, well, you always want to be culturally competent, if you can, but being an ally isn't about knowing everything about Black culture. I don't know everything about Black culture. I still am learning, right, about who I am, but who Black culture is just so diverse. It's just as global as everyone else that lives and walks on this earth. We are all so different. And so what this truly is about, what allyship is about, is like what your dear friend is, which is a person who you can trust, who you can go to, who you can be able to have a conversation with, who will hold that space for you to have that conversation and will love you through it, as you have that conversation. And when you're not there, will stand up for you as a human being, right? And will also recognize when someone is trying to diminish your light, they will say, wait a minute, what are you really saying here? Right? And challenge it in a way that allows someone else to think about their impact, not cancel them, not shame them, but challenges them in a way to think about their impact, and what they're actually, the resistance. It's really about going back to the resistance. And so it's building that muscle. It's about creating the container. It's about having the heart to really hold somebody in a place that they feel safe enough to be able to talk. But to me, I have friends that I've had since I integrated my school, since I was a little girl. They've been my friends forever. And I can call them up and I can speak to anything that I want to in the world. And I know that when I hang up the phone, they still love me for who I am and for who I show up. Those are my besties, right? Well, those are also my best allies. But I can meet someone tomorrow and that person I know has done the work and I can feel into that, and they will also be my ally, even though they don't know me very well. And I also know that there are people out in the world that have never met me, will never meet me, but I trust that they will be my allies. And those are the people that were our lights at the Underground Railroad. Those are the people that stood up to resistance in the Civil War. Those are the people that started the NAACP, that worked with all of us in the legal field to make sure that we could open a way for Brown v. Board of Education. Those are the people that really stood for us when we couldn't stand for ourselves. And that's why we're here today. Those are true allies. You don't have to know them. You just have to know that people deserve a right to be human.
In the work of finding human, which I want to speak to, anybody watching this can go through the Finding Human program and begin to look at your own story in a safe space, to ask the hard questions or the ignorant questions, or just I think my parents might have believed this, and allow that to be safe. They can go through that with you and your team. Mm-hmm. And Paula, what's been a moment that stands out to you in this journey of helping people find human, like an aha moment of your own, or that you witnessed in a client, that you knew that was going to permanently shift something, that there was inherently going to be more safety on the planet because of that awareness?
Wow, that's a wonderful question. And I think it's when people come back and they say, the experience that I have in your class, or the experience that I have going through your program, or I thought about something when I went through your program, and now I find myself with the ability to do this, or now I want to do this, or now I've done this. And to know that they've made this transformational journey just by really kind of listening in is really what is so satisfying to me, that it has actually shifted, and that they have gone from this place of total discomfort to really wanting this place of understanding about where they want to go in the world as a result of the work that they've done. And it might not have anything to do with race. It just might have to do with the courageousness to face resistance, or the courageousness to be an ally to somebody, or to do some work that they really didn't kind of have the guts to do, but know that they made it through, and that now it's opened up so many opportunities for them. And so that's kind of been what's really cool, right? Is to know that you've made an impact in some way.
The future in which people find human as a matter of course, right? We meet and we connect as humans. Tell me about that. Tell me about what we're really shifting when we should shift this conversation, in your view.
Well, it's really just opening up space for people to live who they are, and to be able to share their gifts with the world. It's just that simple. And not to hold them back as humans from how they want to express themselves. And I'm talking about in positive ways. I'm not talking about in ways that obviously would marginalize others or hurt others, but we just really, limit people based on our judgment of them, our stereotypes of them, our fear of them because they're different from us. Finding Human is really creating this space, not only that allows people to heal, but also allows people to show up authentically and share their gifts with the world. It's really that simple. And when we do that, we make space for others.
Yeah. So what I'm taking away, Paula, that I'm loving is when we decrease our resistance, each individual, our resistance to different expressions, then we can make space for someone to just be authentically themselves.
Yeah, it's really that simple. And that's what I love about you, Darla. You're able to sum things up so much better. So many less words than attorneys. I have to write a brief. You do it in a sentence. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's easy to say, right? And it's another thing for for individuals to face that, right? To face their own resistance, and then to use what they've discovered to impact systems. And, you have you're so steeped in the history of the law, and, the law is informing so much in the systems in our country. And so we do need a legal brief about it, right? And we need to have people who can go shift the systems to align with this new understanding of what is human.
It's right. And here's the crux of it, which is really difficult, is that there are people in our country, there's people in our world who don't want it shifted because it's uncomfortable for them, and because they fear that it's going to create a cost to them, and that they want to basically create and keep power within these systems. And so that's the real definition of where that resistance comes in. People don't want change because change to them might mean that there's a personal cost in that. And so they're rebuilt into that. And that's how you have this systemic issue that we're dealing with right now. It's built on caste, it's built on economics, it's built on, unfortunately, the haves and the have-nots in a lot of places in this country and this world. And so when we talk about system shifting and change and having to push towards the chaos into a new sense of order to create space for people to be able to show up, that's where that resistance kind of builds up. The wonderful thing about it is I always say, when we link our arms together and we move forward together, no one will fall, right? And that's really the whole place of what Finding Human is that we have to do this together, and we have to do it in a way in which we all move together. And that's the difficulty of the work, but that's also the passion that I have for it.
So beautiful. So beautiful. Yeah. If we're arm in arm, there is no one up, one down. And there's an inherent threat in that to people who are benefiting from the system. Exactly. I've had to face my own, like, oh, yeah, I could I can give some privilege up. Like, that would be amazing to raise the entire consciousness of the planet.
Right. I remember when you put me through that cost benefit exercise around race, and I had never done it around race. And I was like, wow. And I learned that I have benefited from racist systems myself, right? And that was part of my own racial reckoning, right? My father was educated, and therefore I did have other, benefits that parts of my population, parts of my community never had. And my own community has resisted me as a result, because they didn't necessarily see me as part of the community. I had broken out in some way, and therefore I wasn't much of an ally as I could have been. And that, to me, is something that I've had to look at and work through with regards to my own racial reckoning.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that, because it can feel like, okay, this is work for white people.
Yes.
And it is. It absolutely is, right? Like we need to educate ourselves and stop relying on others to correct us when we mess up. But it's work for everybody to understand how are these forces at play within me, because like you said, all the cultures are diverse and everybody's had a very unique story. No one else has your same story around this conversation. And so we have to be responsible for our own story and do the work.
And look at it. We have to look at it. Yeah.
Yeah. Because then we know what systems need to change, or we know why something's happening, so we can find the way to transform the thing. But without that, we don't really know. And then where you started this conversation, then we're just fighting in resistance against something, but nothing's actually changing.
Right. Exactly. It's exactly right.
So below this video, there will be a link where you can find out about Finding Human. What I will say is I know Paula and I are cooking up a cohort of Finding Human for leaders in the transformational space, leaders committed to cultural change. And we'll let you know about that. So definitely check out the links below this video. Paula, is there anything else you want to leave people with?
I just, it goes back to where do I start? And we need allies. We need people to understand who they are. We need people to create space for other people. I mean, this is what this work really is, what it really means to me. It's not just in the education field, it is in the world, right? It's in everything we do. And so especially with people that are coaching people, that are creating experiences, that are, doing workshops and retreats. I really I've benefited from the fact that the people that I work with have wanted to understand this work that I do, and they've wanted to find human, and they've been committed, and they are creating spaces for others to be able to show up as their authentic selves. And that to me is the real gift of this work. So
my computer agrees. Yeah, it really is. The more of us that are integrating our own stories, the more we can hold that space of safety and non-resistance.
Yeah.
Because it's felt, the moment you say, ooh, I don't know if I believe you, or get over it, or whatever it may be, we're bringing resistance in. So It's like expanding our comfort zone.
Right. And I can always tell a person that has really done their own self-discovery, because when I come into their space, they have built the container for me to feel welcome and included. And not just me, but everybody that comes into that room to feel welcome and included. There's a real shift in the way that I feel when I go into that room. And it's not because I've taken my course, they've just done the work.
Yeah. And people will, now I feel like I want to go back to your educators, and people will say, well, we have a system, or we have a process, or we've hired Paula and we checked the box that we have an equity plan. And yeah, okay, great. But energetically, right? Our energy speaks louder than the checking the box. And that's what I agree to.
Absolutely. It's that going back to that inner knowing and being able to do the work. Yeah.
Thank you, Paula.
I appreciate you, Darla.
I love you. Thank you for the work you do in the world. And I'm excited for my whole team to take the next Finding Human. So
I am too. And thank you for receiving my work. I really appreciate you, and I love you for it.
Have a beautiful day.
Okay.
Bye, everyone.